there with the Colts, understanding that, well, he's retiring at the same time. Like, it just doesn't compute. It doesn't make sense. And I think my reaction would have been strong at that point. Now, let's take that to what I said was the next segment. So the next sort of station of processing this whole thing was I watched the Andrew Luck press conference on that evening, as I'm sure you did. And he really laid his heart out on his sleeve for 25 minutes. And I think then it's like, okay, now we are hearing it from Andrew Luck and his point of view and what he's been through. And I think we also get a sense that I don't think this is really a choice he would have liked to have made. I think it's a choice he feels like he needs to make. And I think if you would have asked him 4 years ago, hey, you're going to be retiring when you're 29 due to all of these injuries that are breaking you down emotionally, he wouldn't have wanted that. He wouldn't have said, yeah, that sounds great. You know, so I think that's the second stage of grief in this for the fans, is recognizing that as a human being, Andrew Luck is processing some physical feelings, some pain and some emotion here, and choosing what's best for him and his family. And that's where it starts to hit the second stage of dealing with this, to say, yeah, I think we can give him a pass on that. So Justin, that's kind of my next framing to you is, do we give Andrew Luck a pass on this 2 weeks before the season?
Well, I think the flip side of this is Andrew Luck could have went into the season, started out on IR, maybe never played again, gotten all his money for this year, and then walked away in the offseason. And then people would have had a completely different reaction to a guy that walked away, leaving. I think he had a $6 million bonus due to him in September, and they just worked it out where the Colts weren't going to go after any of his previous money, and he wasn't taking any money this year, because apparently that story's out there that they offered him that chance to start the year on IR, designated to return, see how he felt 4 to 6 weeks in, if the passion came back, if he felt like he wanted to give it a go, and he didn't want to do that to the team. So I think from that standpoint, he seems like a pretty stand-up guy to do that. So I think you have to take him at his word that he rode this thing through. And Eric, I also think about this. He had what they're calling some kind of a calf. Irsay said it was high ankle. Then he said lower leg. We did just watch maybe the best player in the NBA blow his Achilles out screwing around with a calf. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's more to this injury than we were led to believe. And this goes back to, again, the Colts and their inability to communicate with their fans and the general public. Remember, one of the first stories we talked about on the show was Jim Irsay a few years ago saying Andrew Luck would be out there week 1, and he never was.
Right.
For that 2017 season.
Right.
So you've got this that's out there where the Colts just don't communicate with their fans. They lie to them. They spin the truth. Then they're super quiet about stuff. We talked about it last week when you went back and listened to us talk about the Colts of, hey, this is what we're talking about with what their records could be and what they could do, but it's all hinging on luck. And we have no clue the severity of this injury because we don't know from past experiences what's going to happen with him. So I do believe Andrew Luck, but this story is so shocking and out of nowhere. The reports were out there. He had been talking to Peyton Manning at one of the practices about when he would be back there, and he was just firing the ball at one point. And there's all these different reports that are out there about Luck and how he was performing and what he looked like, and him even talking about getting out on the field to retiring. So I think that does lend itself to start throwing around the conspiracy theories, because as much as I want to take him that it is injury related, I do start to think about, okay, there was talk that he got injured snowboarding. That's how he initially injured the shoulder. So did the Colts try to restructure, put different language in his contract about different things he could do? His dad's running the XFL. Is there a role for him there? Did the medical staff from the Colts misdiagnose injuries like we were seeing with Trent Williams in Washington, where he does not want to play for the Redskins anymore because they misdiagnosed his injury, and they screwed up Colt McCoy as well? Did something like that happen to Andrew Luck? So I think anytime, Eric, you have a story that's this shocking and this out of nowhere, it lends itself towards looking at the conspiracies or what else is going on, because it's like, how could he make this turn from saying he was going to be on the field to walking away from the game entirely?
And the nenext question I would have, because this guy is not a bad quarterback. I know I have had my bias against him.
Oh my God. You said that?
Look, I still believe in my arguments that some of his amazing third and fourth quarter play is a result of gunslinging and having to have your back up against the wall because of interceptions and fumbles you had in the first half. I'm not going to back down on that. I still fully believe that. And I think I always had a chip on my shoulder for Andrew Luck because of guys like Colin Cowherd and others who were so enamored by him at Stanford that he was like the second coming of, John Elway, Joe Montana, whomever, and that he was just going to win every Super Bowl with the Colts from here until the day he retired. And as we know, he didn't win any Super Bowls. And really, other than some amazing regular season stats, the team didn't succeed in his years there. So that was going to be my next question is, as we look at this guy who had enormous potential, he was a good quarterback. His statistics do basically disprove my theory that he wasn't I say he's overrated. The statistics actually disprove me on that. I just go by the eye test and what you've produced in the postseason. And I just don't think he lives up to that platform that everyone put him on. But through the first 86 games of a career, and that's where he's done. He's done at 86 games, at least at this point, from what we know. He ranks second and third in terms of passing touchdowns and passing yards. So he's got good stats. No Super Bowls. So Justin, how does that leave his legacy, or does he even have a legacy in the NFL other than a blip on the radar? In other words, does he go down as one of the better quarterbacks that's ever played the game, or does he really have a name that stays out of that conversation due to the brevity of his career and the fact that there was no postseason success?
I think this is where you're going to see how fantasy football blends in with real football. So I think it's going to be dependent on who you talk to. If you talk to fans that are very statistically driven because of fantasy, they will probably think of Luck and have him ranked in their minds higher than his on the field play that people on the inside would probably believe. That's where I think it'll end up. I think the statistics will blow people away with what he was able to do, the yards, the touchdowns, things like that. People won't look at the fact in the playoffs, 4-4 record, 12 TDs to 13 picks. They're going to look at the statistic. Oh, that guy was so good in fantasy football. I had him on my team. I tried to get him every year. He was, outside of when he missed, when he was on there, he did this and that. It'll be like, oh, he was 29. He could have been so great. He was just hitting his prime and just hitting his stride. He was finally on a good roster. I think that's how most people will remember him. And some of that is true because he did have one of the worst GMs, I think, that's ever come through football in Ryan Grigson. Some of the dumb stuff that they did. The fact that they wouldn't draft any offensive linemen early on. They gave up a first round pick for Trent Richardson, who is still, I think, trying to make the AAF, even though it's defunct. I mean, that's how bad it was. Some of the moves that Grigson made, he never put anybody around Luck to protect him. So you had a quarterback that was trying to elevate a really, really bad roster. You look at some of the wide receivers outside T.Y. Hilton that came through Indy while Luck was there. Wasn't a ton for him to work with at that time. A lot of young guys or a lot of older guys and T.Y. That was pretty much it. No wonder they're best friends because that's the only guy that Luck had that he could depend on. So, yeah, he's going to throw him the ball 10, 12, 14 times a game. He's going to get that target share. So I think that's really where it ends up for Luck. I think most people, it's almost like a fish story. The fish is just going to get bigger and bigger as further you get away from the boat, and people are going to just continue to embellish his career. Oh, what could have been. And I can be honest, Derek, I'm not 100% sold on the fact that Andrew Luck is done. I think if I got odds in Vegas at 4 or 5 to 1 that within the next 2 years, Andrew Luck would be back on a NFL field playing, I think I would take those odds. I just think that when he gets away from the game, if he loves the game as much as he says, and he did seem legitimately like he loved it, like the injuries had just worn him out. But if he starts feeling good, the way that the money is in the league, and just the fact that if you love the game and you want to come back, especially if there was some things that were happening with the Colts with misdiagnosis and maybe they go into the draft and move on or something and they're willing to trade him or move him to somewhere else, I'm not completely sold on the fact in today's climate that he's done. What do you think?
Wow, that is something I hadn't thought of, to be honest with you. And I hear you out on that. I think that's an interesting theory, especially because of his age. If he were, 32 at this point and kind of him hawing around, like, do I retire? Do I not retire? Like a Brett Favre type of thing. I might not know how to feel about that. But I'm going to give you a little bit of creativity credit there that at 29 years old, 2 seasons from now, he's still only 31. And, Brady's playing until he's 41. So yeah, I mean, if he gets over some of these injuries and can actually maintain his training, maintain his physique, but be healthy for a good year to year and a half of that time frame, maybe get some time to travel with his wife, get some time off, get to clear his head a little bit. Yeah, I could see that being a possibility. What I don't know, and you might know it more than I do, is do the Colts have rights to Andrew Luck for a certain period of time, even though he's retired? Like, he walks away from that money, but if he says, I'm now unretired, do they have the rights to him up until what his deal would have been?
Typically, yeah. Depending on the time frame he comes back, waivers can get involved. You may have to go through a process of giving up some type of compensation. Thinking back of who's come out of retirement, this has happened. The Favre situation, I feel like there was draft picks involved. I don't know all of that around it, but I just feel like at some point, Eric, he's got a baby on the way. You can't backpack through Europe with an infant. Sorry, you're just not going to work that way. I mean, you can, but you're not going to have a very fun time. There's only so much travel and all that he's going to be able to do. And when his body starts feeling better and he's healthy, if he really loves the game in the manner that he says, I just think he's going to have a hard time staying away from it, especially at that age. Even if he's like, okay, I'm going to come back and play, sign one more deal. Obviously, for him, money's probably not an option. He's made, I think, $97 million through the first 6 years of his career. So it's not like he's coming back that he needs that. But being around football his whole life with his dad being a quarterback, there's got to be something in him that is burning a little hotter than most people, you would think. And I just think that when he comes back, if he's healthy, I just wouldn't take it off the table. I just don't think it's a completely closed door. Do I know that or think it, or do I want to set odds? No. But I said, if Vegas had a prop bet for it, if it's 4 or 5 to 1, yeah, I'd throw a little money on there that maybe there's a chance that he comes back because, again, with his age, this is a guy that people talked about having a flip phone for all these years because he didn't want a smartphone because he wanted no distractions because his life was all about football. Just feels like even if you're married and you have kids, that at some point, if that it was there, and we're just talking about him several weeks ago about how excited he was to come back and this and that, and then all of a sudden, it just feels like there's something else here that we're missing. There is a piece of this puzzle that we just haven't gotten yet.
Yeah, and sometimes there really is, right? I mean, he doesn't have a smartphone. He also clearly doesn't have a Gillette power razor. But
does that mean he's not going to New England then? Or would that be the perfect marriage?
Well, I think if he can learn how to shave, he might go to New England. No, I think he's going to have to learn how to shave before he can be an executive in the XFL. And so I was kind of wondering, before we end segment 1, Talkworthy and the Andrew Luck situation as it continues to develop here, does the XFL, in your mind, play any part in whether or not he would unretire? In other words, so now he's retired. He may do what you said, get healthy, get his mind right, and come back to the NFL. Or he may get his body right, get his mind right, and then get entrenched in being an executive in the XFL. How do you feel like that fits in? Or do you feel like the odds are just as good at that as they would be at coming back?
Oh, I could definitely see him stepping into more of an executive role and doing something like that. Maybe just kind of learning the ropes with the XFL for however long that league lasts. And maybe he steps into a role like that with the NFL down the road. I mean, that's another option if he wants to be around the game and he sees some of the issues that are happening with player injuries or the way players are treated, and he can step into some type of role that like a Troy Vincent has or something where he's working directly with the players. That's also a possibility, I think, as well. I don't foresee him obviously ever playing in the XFL, but I could see him doing some type of an advisory consultant type role. Yeah, for sure. I definitely could see that with the ties there. Obviously, it's going to come up during a family dinner of what's going on with the league. So, yeah, I could definitely see that happening down the road. So let me ask you this, Eric. Last week we talked about the Colts with their over-under. You went under on them anyway, so the line has been reset to 7.5. So where do you think this team now lands now that we get a kind of a redo on the Colts?
At 7.5, I'm still going to take the under. I'm still going to say they don't win more than 7. So I feel comfortable there. I do like some of the things that Jacoby Brissett does. I said that last week even, that he does some things better than Andrew Luck. Now, certainly not all things, But if this is now quote unquote his team and he's running the offense and he doesn't have a fill-in role, maybe that works for him. Maybe he